Okay, this may get a little bit disjointed because I'm probably going to do this over the course of several different days probably as I want to really peel this one apart. But this is a deck called Art History Tarot for Past Lives by Red Orchid Publishing. And the creator is, her name is Melanie Henson. And I talked to her, she contacted me about whether or not I would be interested in taking a look at this deck, and I actually really was, because I do read for past life readings. It's something that I absolutely love to do, and I have looked at other past life oracles and things of that nature, but they are usually, in my opinion, much too small in scope to be very helpful. And so I just haven't really found anything. I just used tarot decks and other oracle decks, and that works great for me. But something like this, where the intention is very specifically towards giving you access to all of the different countries and continents, and time periods and things of that nature, and then archetypes as well. And I'm going to try to break this down again for myself as well as for anybody interested in this deck. But the concept is, let me see if I can she again reads past life readings for clients, and she said, what if we designated certain cards for countries and periods of times? Then she could allow the cards to flow through the sessions as they would in any other tarot reading. So she ended up using art history as tarot images, enrich the quality of this deck for her as well. So I'm trying to see if I feel a need to acknowledge that this deck is not as inclusive as it ideally would be. Much of art history is Eurocentric. Efforts were made to find artists and subject matter from diverse cultures, but I was limited to royalty-free public domain images for this project. The deck does not include the range of history I would deem ideal. So this is, a step in the right directions. Please rely heavily on any diversity arising from the cards to find your truth. And then she also says, I would like to address the topic of gender. Although I firmly believe that we can transition between the two genders throughout lifetimes, for the purpose of the reading Past Lives with this deck, it is important that gender identity remain fixed. Your mother was a woman, your brother was a man. This is simply because you need a point of reference. So it is talking about that type of gender issues. Most needed messages that arise from your reading have nothing to do with gender, and so simplifying this process will help keep the focus where it should be. Simply use whatever gender you or the person you are asking about identifies with in this life to draw connections. And so, I like this because she has taken what was a need for herself, right? She does past life readings. She was finding herself having to pull out of the tarot reading part to try to do the mediumship for her, the mediumship part of trying to figure out countries and more specific detail-oriented things. Now, I tend to go the opposite, where I start from the birth chart. And so I do tend to, by the time I'm through the birth chart aspect for me personally, I tend to get a feeling already about, like, gender, say, of the past life that's going on. And then I move into the reading itself and just kind of fix there, and I don't really worry about details. But what I love is that for her, there was a need here for herself in the way that she read. And so she's created what she could with the tools she had to create something to fill that need. Because if you look at, again, I know there's a Doreen Virtue past life oracle deck, which I have looked at, and I just didn't find to be very functional for me. Again, scope was not there. here. And that's, I think, the main one that I have seen. I know I've seen it there. I think there's more than just that, but just nothing that has tweaked my interest, where it still can remain a tarot deck and be used just as the tarot deck. But at the same time, you can also maybe draw in some of those more details, correlations, which sometimes I'll do at the end of a past life reading with a Lenormand or a Kipper deck, right? Because there's a lot more people in a Kipper deck. If it's sort of, it feels like a people-oriented situation, I can go into more specifics about like job, occupation, things of those natures with something like Lenormand. So this kind of puts those things right within the reading and not having to step outside of that. I know I'm rambling. It's what I do. My point is, what I love is that she had a need and saw an empty space, and so she did what she could do to fulfill that need, and acknowledges that this is not the perfect rendition of this because of the limitations of art, and especially public domain art. The scope isn't quite what she would like it to be, but she worked hard to try to make it as wide as it could be. So this certainly is a wonderful way to at least try to go into it. So there is a book that is involved with it. She gives us a spread here, and then she gives you a page on each of the cards. I don't know if that's the same. Yeah, she gives you a page on each of the cards that gives you an image. It gives you about the art that was used, which I love. She gives the traditional card that this would be, the root energy. So if you're just talking about the energy of the card and you're not really looking for details, which are going to be pretty typical, I think, standard tarot messages. And then how this might relate to you in the past life, how it might relate to a place, how it might relate to a time. And so she has all of that, she has that for each one of the cards. So that's that. We'll look a little bit further into that in a minute. I'm going to be separating these into piles for a moment. I'm not going to be doing this probably my traditional way of kind of flipping through the cards and that, because I do want to kind of make some piles and do some processing, right? But just in general, you can see that they are borderless. The art fills the card. It has the title of the card in relation to reading it as a past life reading in the top. Some of them are relative to the tarot name, if that relates, and some of them are more relating to like Africa, before a time, a place, a type, archetype, or a family member like mother, or a situation like a karmic lesson. So this is relating to the deck as a past life tarot deck. But she does below have the name of a traditional name of the tarot, as well as the information about the art, which is great because you do have a date range from the piece of art as well. And then the backs are like this, which kind of go with the bag that came with it, with the red orchid on the back of the bag, as on the back of the deck. So that's the structure, and that goes all the way across to the minors as well. This is definitely Rider-Waite-Smith with the Ten of Swords as being murder. 10 of Swords. So she has the number 10 of, and then just S for swords, P for pentacles, but certainly enough for you to clue into what card this might relate to. So the cards look beautiful in terms of the artwork and all that. They look, so far I haven't gone through every one, obviously, but they look, they've printed nicely. They don't seem blurry or anything like that. So that's beautiful. That is I want to say, I've seen this before. I want to say this is a Swiss painting, sister. I will say this is a little bit small for but that's my poor eyesight and I don't have my glasses on, but I can see now when I look closely, Portrait of a Young Swiss Girl. So yeah, that is kind of just, again, I'm doing this a little bit backwards, but I just want to get a feel for how this is. So I'm going to split this into some piles and I will come back. Okay, I've pulled these into some piles just to see sort of how things are laid out. This is by no means exhaustive. It is just sort of taking a cursory look and pulling them apart. I feel like she's done a good job kind of pulling a little bit from what you would see with Kipper. You do have the people like that you would encounter: mother, father, spouse, daughter, there's son, as well as brother and sister. There is a loving woman and the benevolent man. These are ideas that you would get from Kipper. Here we have the sun, the traveler. The visible woman and the philandering man is an interesting one. Combination. I'll have to read up on the visible woman. There we have the brother, we have the soldier, the rational woman, and the rich, like you get those as well. Similar to that, I think, in Kipper, the sister, a true friend. And then you have lovers, which could go in somewhere else, but you're in a situation as, I would assume that would be as your lover, so to speak. I talked about the young woman in that. Then there is an indigenous man and an indigenous woman. So I'm not sure why you wouldn't just have, because there isn't a man and a woman. There's a mother, father, spouse, daughter, son, all of these types of things. But I guess there isn't a male and just a straight up man and a woman. So it's interesting. I'm going to read. I think it's good to have, obviously, the various, to be able to have this. Let's see what she says. An indigenous woman could simply be indicating an ethnicity, one that's rooted to traditionally earth-centric cultures. And then the indigenous man could be indicating the ethnicity of a past life. Again, one rooted to traditionally earth-centered cultures outside of a lot of the European cultures that we might see here. So we do have that as perhaps. Now, obviously, if you were an indigenous person and you had a past life reading, I guess this would indicate whether you continued down the line in an indigenous way, or opens things up to, okay, you may be this person of this ethnicity now, but this might indicate a shift in ethnicity, perhaps, is how that might be used there. So we do have those. So really a lot of people here. Again, I think it shows how something like Kipper, and this I think takes it even further, gives you a lot of people opportunities to work with. Then for places, she seems to have a very broad range. We do have Africa, America, Asia, Europe, South America, Australia, the Middle East. Then we have some countries, and when I asked her about the breadth of sort of the places, she tried to pull, major areas from each of the continents or each of these. But they don't have to be just specifically that, but it can also be further into the area. So we have Turkey, Congo, Korea, China, Japan, Spain, India, Greece, and Mexico for places. But some of the other things can also be indications of place. Time-wise, we have before Christ. We have the High Middle Ages from 1000 to 1200, the Late Middle Ages from 1250 to 1400, the 16th century, so we're kind of missing the 15th century, the 16th century, yes. We're missing the there's a 17. I just got them out of order. Okay. So it goes from before Christ, right? And then it goes to the High Middle Ages, the Late Middle Ages, so that goes up to the 1400s, the 16th century for the 15, 17 for the 1600s, 18 for the 17, and 19th century for the 1800s. So it kind of ends there. I guess it would have been nice to have one for the 20th century for the 1900s, but, again, she acknowledges that it's not perfect, but it certainly gives us far more to work from than we normally do. So then there are some bigger concepts like religion and fate and strength and justice, as well as the concept of the twin flames, of strong connection is how I would personally, I don't really work with twin flames, so to speak. But for me, this would be something that would be this really strong connection over perhaps multiple lifetimes. And then you have the hero, the concept of a hero there. So these are kind of like larger concepts. Then there's some that are situational, such as premature death. Obviously, death is involved. You wouldn't be who you are in this life if your past life person did not die, right? So there is always going to be death there. And truthfully, in the way that I read past lives, they have the ones that I'm paying attention to are the ones that are still kind of have the most impact on your current life, which is how I see what we can see through your birth chart being the past life that is most influencing your current life. It also tends to be the things that have unfinished business, right? If there weren't unfinished business involved, then it probably wouldn't, that would have resolved itself and you'd be onto something fresh. So I don't think it's too surprising, and I always talk about this, that difficult subjects often do come up in past life readings, because it wouldn't be showing up if it wasn't that this is some a difficult situation that needs to be resolved. So karmic lesson that's involved. And then there's some situational things like slavery and plague and migration. This is friendship, which I guess could go more in that. Karmic connections, prison, old age, live to a ripe old age, charity, poison. I thought that was an interesting one. Abandonment and conflict. So I think that there is definitely a feeling of, life wasn't easy in a lot of these. Apathy, loss, resolute, depression, genetic illness, brokenheartedness, chronic illness, violence, drowning, betrayal, oppression, dreams, murder, greed, and starvation. So these are definitely have a overtone of the difficult struggles in life. And especially, I'm sorry, if you get back very far, not that I'm saying that life is easy for everybody today, but it doesn't take going back too far in history in which life was a physical, everyday survival struggle in many cases for many people in the world. So it definitely has that sense, but I don't think you would be using this for a regular tarot reading, in which you might get a reading that does seem to be, might come up always being a little bit darker, right? Because the whole point of this is that you have past life issues that are coming up, however you tend to read for past lives, whether you read it like me, okay, we're looking at the one that has the most unfinished business that is affecting your current life. That means inherently that things did not go the way that that you would have hoped in that past life. That means that there were difficult things to sort through. And so there is an overlay already in a past life reading that there are struggles there. Now, can you read a past life reading for more positive things? Of course. But that's is generally what things are going on. So I understand that, and this is not a deck, given the nature of that, I wouldn't recommend this as a deck that you were doing just for regular readings, because I think it would have an overtone of feeling very difficult, bringing up some real difficult situations that I don't think would necessarily be relevant for a current life reading. But that's why it's called Tarot for Past Lives. It's not Tarot for Today. There's lots of decks for that. And this, I just don't think, is probably the one for that. So that, I'm just kind of wanted to break them down that way. So I'm going to have to now put them back in order because I just wanted to get a feel for that. And then we can walk through the cards individually. I did want to mention that the Fool card is really relating to you. And so when this comes up in a card, in a reading, she talks about how all of the cards in the reading are very, very much relating to you yourself in this path, where other things you could be talking about a lover or talking about your family or some other things like that could come up. When the you card comes up, the cards that are in the reading are really related to you specifically, and you might read those a little bit differently because they aren't describing somebody else. They're really related to the person at hand. My guess is that this was printed through Make Your Playing Cards. It's actually got a really good feel to the cardstock. I have another deck that was recently, that I recently got, that was a recent printing from Make Your Playing Cards. And I have to say that I feel like there's been a little bit of a shift in their cardstock. It has a really nice feel to the sides of this deck. Is one that I would likely put black edges on. And it shuffles, if you're a riffle shuffler, it really shuffles like a dream. It really is a gorgeous shuffle to it, so that is something that I personally appreciate. Okay, I haven't put this exactly back in order because I think I don't know, for me this is more important to see it sort of in its sets, I guess, than so much in the order of tarot. I also am going to talk, I did some readings with it, and I really like what she has done here, and really explaining clearly how you need to use this, because it is important. Otherwise, I do think you can get more sort of place heavy. There's a very good opportunity for you to get very heavy in a specific place or time, multiple time cards, and she sets up a process on how to rule that out. So we will talk about that a little bit more. So let's go through these real quick. I'm going to actually use a book though, because I can't read as clear. It's going to take me longer if I'm trying to decipher the art. And actually, I'm not going to go through all of the art here, but it does list what it is, the name. It says Archangel Gabriel in the Annunciation by Filippino Lippi. He was born and died in Florence, Italy, and painted during the Florentine Renaissance. He was the illegitimate son of painter Fra Filippo Lippi and Lucrezia, I can't say, I think it's Butti, I'm sure I'm slaughtering this, an Italian nun. Lippi studied under his father, and most of his work reflected biblical scenes. And so that gives you a nice little chunk about the artist, and then of course it has the dates here as well. So that represents you or the Fool. Here we have the, so these are all people. It starts with you, and I just put in a bunch of people, all the people cards. So again, we have Mother with, would be associated with the Empress, Father with the Emperor, Spouse is the Two of Cups, Sister is the Page of Pentacles, Brother is the Page of Swords, Son is the Page of Wands, and Daughter is the Page of Cups. So you can see that she used all of the pages for the sister, brothers, sons, and daughters are the page cards, which I think is really fantastic. We have the Queen of Wands for the Visible Woman. I thought that was an interesting name, and I just opened straight up to it. So this is more of that independent artist type energy. She's also the person that gets noticed. She could also be a bit of a flirt when you're talking about, which is why probably you have it with the philandering man. And you certainly have these types of energies in like Sibylla decks, Kipper decks of various people. So the Visible Woman is a woman who gets noticed. She's often the life of the party and socially graceful. Christina, Queen of Sweden, reflects classic Queen of Wands energy. She defied expectations by delving into philosophy. She often dressed as a man in disguise and was rumored to have a lesbian affair. She turned heads. She rejected traditional female roles, and the Pope called her a woman without shame. Alternative interpretation, the Queen of Wands can often appear to represent the older woman in a relationship. This is simply the other woman in a love triangle, not necessarily the one having an affair. And of course, this is a card that would represent the place of Sweden and the time of the 17th century. So it's really quite interesting. I do like what I mean, I think she's put a lot of work into this. I think that's really powerful, actually. I love that. So then we have the philandering man. I like this term visible woman, and I would have liked something more similar for the philandering man. You know, I don't think of, yeah, like this is King Henry VIII. Like, I would have liked somebody a little more strong. Well, he was a strong leader. He just, and I don't think his philandering was the problem as much as the cutting off of people's heads. I don't know. I guess I would have liked something similar to the visible woman, where there's a man who just wasn't, you know, powerful, wasn't going to toe the line, was going to do what he wants, which I guess Henry VIII is certainly, you know, does exude those things, with maybe it sounds like a bit more problematic history than perhaps her. But there we have it. So then we have the loving woman, which is so beautiful here. Again, I don't have these in order as the book does, but look at how beautiful that is. Portrait of a nurse from the Red Cross, the Queen of Cups. So now we're getting into, obviously, I'm going to start splitting these up. The King of Wands, the Queen of Wands. So then these are all the pages here. Okay, so we'll see what the jacks are. So the Queen of Cups as the loving woman and as a nurse. I think that's beautiful. And then the benevolent, oh my goodness, benevolent man. This is St. Louis, King of France. Let's see what they say about him, or what she says about him. What is this? This is the cups. That's, I think, at the beginning. I will say the one thing this could have used is a directory with page numbers, or something that made it more easily to figure out what you were looking at, and that way you can find it a little bit easier. That's just me, though. I mean, they are in order, so it's not like it's entirely difficult here, but the hero is going to be the knight there. Emotional man, loving man. This one doesn't really talk directly about St. Louis the Ninth, King of France, but it says many historians concur that St. Louis the Ninth, King of France, was perhaps the kindest king in history. He fed the poor at his own table, washed their feet, and worked on reforming homes after war raids. Oh, see, look at. I think she's done a really lovely job. So then we have the rational woman, of course, as the Queen of Swords, which I think is awesome, with Queen Elizabeth. Come on. And the rational man with the King of Sweden as the King of Swords. So that, I think, is amazing. And then for Pentacles, she did the Indigenous man with Buffalo Bull's back fat, as well as with this here by an unknown artist. So let's look at those. I think that it works, like when you're trying to get more of indigenous people as the earth energies. I think that definitely works. Let's see what this says about Pentacles. Again, there we go. Indigenous woman. The Queen of Pentacles is recognizable by her consistent and dependable nature, a woman who is a rock in her home and who can depend on blah, 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 blah. The woman in this 1830 portrait is believed to be Pioca, wife of the Seminole chief Osceola, and their son, though the artist remains unknown. Osceola was a mixed race, Creek, Indian, and English, which accounts for the European features of the child. So this is an actual woman, which is really lovely to see. And she was the wife of a chief. And then the Indigenous man we have as, again, Buffalo Bull's back fat. He was the chief of the Blood Indians. was about 50 years old at the time of the sitting. His own warriors, as well as natives from enemy tribes such as Crow and Cree, surrounded the chief and artist during the sitting. So there we have those two. So that's obviously the courts, and then we have the pages, the queens, the kings, and the pages. And then the knights, we have the true friend here for the Knight of Pentacles. We have the soldier for the Knight of Swords. So I wonder who the other two knights... Oh, one was the hero. I'm going to grab that. Okay, so we have the hero for the Knight of Cups, which I think is really cool. The Young Hero is a painting by, looks like Andrei Ivanov. And then we have the Traveler for the Knight of Wands. So you can see the people that we have here are all surrounding the court cards, which I really quite like, to be honest. I think it's pretty neat. And then we have the archetype of the mother, the father, and the spouse as well there. Okay, so we'll keep moving. So I love that. So then we get into the time periods. We have the time period of before Christ with the High Priestess. And this is offering to, I think that is, I can't read it. I gotta find my glasses. But here, let's pull it up here. So there's the Lovers. So let's look at the time card. So the traditional card is a High Priestess, female magic, passive and wise observation, female authority, and psychic abilities. Refers to the period before Christ, primarily during earth-centered religious practice. So this is really talking about more of the earth-centered practice, while we have I can't find it with, I think we have religion perhaps for the Hierophant, sorry, I can't speak. Speaking of more of that secular, or not secular, more of that institutionalized religion, right? So you have those two going together really interestingly. If the card is not read as a time card, it could denote psychic abilities in a past life, a woman who is wise and slow to act as she observes the events unfolding before her, or worshiping the goddess. Your past likely includes a nature-centered life without the restrictions of formal religion. So that's how they're using the High Priestess and the Hierophant as that sort of pre-Christian, pagan, earth-centered, and that kind of post-Christian, more institutionalized religion. So I think that is interesting. But I think that's a separate card as in religion. I'm going to kind of, you know me, always making piles, always making piles. So then we have the High Middle Ages, 1000 to 1250 AD, the Late Middle Ages, 1250 to 1400. Then we have the 16th century, which is, of course, the 1500s. We have the 17th century, which is the 1600s, the 18th, which is the 1700s, and it doesn't go into the 1900s. Or, sorry, into the 1800s. Then it doesn't go into the 1900s. So those are your time cards. And then if it's not about timing, you simply go to revert to the actual cards, the central meanings of the cards themselves. So we've, had people, we had time, and then we have places where she goes through the continent. So she has Asia here as the Hermit, as the Chariot. She has the Americas, well, America, because she also has South America, I believe, here. She has Africa in the Magician, Australia for the Sun, the Middle East for Judgment, where you have Mott. That's kind of interesting. Europe, then we have as the Star. South America, we have as the Moon, with some Mayan art here. Okay, so when I was talking to her in messages, she did say that what she did was find the astrological sign for certain countries and areas, and then paired that with a corresponding tarot card that had that same astrological sign. I took cards that were less concrete, that didn't offer as much detail for past life reading to use for the countries and the era. But then she also wrote I asked if she was able to get a broad range of places and times, or was she constrained because of the art? I was curious because I figured the art would be more geographically and era constrained. And she said each continent is covered on its own card, except for Antarctica. And then I took the 2 top populated countries for each continent. That was just the fairest way she could do it. So obviously, you can look at these as very specific, or you can kind of give them the more structured area as well. That it was just kind of, if you hit the ones that are in the continent of Asia, you can have that sort of broader understanding there as well. So for the countries, we have Korea, we have Spain, we have India, Turkey, China, Mexico, it's a beautiful image, Japan, Greece, Congo, and I think that is all of the of the places. So we have that, and then religion would kind of go along with the concept of the high priestess and the hierophant. You have that more earth pagan oriented spirituality, and then you have more of the institutionalized religion. So that's kind of a set as well there. So some she left, like she left justice, and these seem to be like broader topics to me, like a justice, a karmic connection, a karmic lesson. These are things that I do like to look at in birth charts. The concept of the twin flames. We'll see what she writes about that. Again, I don't work a lot with the idea of twin flames. However, I do with this idea that we can have this strong connection that will kind of reoccur over and over again in across lifetimes, right? And so she does go on to talk about the twin flames in particular, but I think that this can be used very easily the way that how I would use it was just that connection, a relationship connection that was just so strong and is reoccurrent. And so we have that concept there. We have the concept of strength, the concept of fate, being stuck in a cycle of fate. It's just there was no way out of the situation in some way. And then there were, well, even loss. I think loss was a situation. Being poisoned was more of a situation. We've kind of changed over to some situational things. Death, of course. Charity, being either the giver or the receiver of charity, a situation of strong friendship, being in a situation of conflict, genetic illness, oppression, slavery, violence, migration, chronic illness, which I thought was interesting that we had a genetic illness and a chronic illness. Like those two for me, or probably the first two that I would say, are very similar cards to each other. Let's see, we have the 2 of Swords and the 4 of Swords. Chronic illness, it has as a rest, recovery, and taking on that idea of rest that you might have to do. It's specifically categorized as a cause of death, whether that be a chronic, as somebody that is sick, and this type of thing. In terms of the genetic illness, let's see, that was the 2. It is also a cause of death. The traditional 2 of Swords depicts a figure blindfolded, forming a connection to the blind figure. So this doesn't necessarily mean they're going to die from it, I suppose, but did they have some sort of a disfigurement or like blindness or these types of things, hearing loss, these kinds of things such as that, I suppose. And again, if it's not being used in that way, the other thing is they all have a place and a time as well. So there's just many different ways to read them depending on depending on how, what position you're looking at. Betrayal, was the death by betrayal, abandonment, premature death, prison. In prison, it's a beautiful image. Starvation, very difficult image. A situation of being lovers with somebody, I suppose. Being in a plague. Murder. Of course, we can't have past life cards without a murder card. Maybe this person just died of old age. Drowning, you know, that's something that's talked a lot about that can show up again in current lives. And then there were these random cards. I feel like these were the most random for me, just because I feel like the rest is so interesting how they are pulled together, but they're more like feelings or emotions, feelings of apathy, having a broken heart. I mean, I suppose that is a situation. Being depressed, I suppose, is a situation. Dreams are interesting. Being resolute, like that's to me not necessarily a situation, but it could be that this is a person who is very resolute, more a character attribute. And then this concept of greed, which you could certainly be in a situation in which greed was portrayed as well. So, very interesting though. I do feel like a lot of thought has gone into the placement of the images with the card itself, the tarot card, as well as the titles. They make sense in terms of, again, Rider-Waite-Smith, basic traditional Rider-Waite-Smith meanings are there as well. So as I said, I do think that reading this, like with every card being using the title, would actually probably come out to be a rather dark reading, right? Because that's not the intention of this deck. This is a deck for a very specific purpose of doing past life readings. So let me zoom out a bit here. And she talks about how to prioritize. So she has general rules for the place and time cards. Because again, you could end up with a whole bunch of places and a whole bunch of times in a particular reading. And what do you do with that? So she has a reading here where the core card and the crossing, and the core card takes precedence. So she has sort of a hierarchy until you can find one that is a place and a time, which ones you would put the most most impact on as being about the specific place and time. So she really goes through that specifically, and then talks about how you really do need to if it's not for those specific purposes, you need to focus on the, what does she call it, the root energy of the card, because otherwise you're just going to have a mix of all kinds of things. So making sure, I think, that you have a position. So for example, I do the past life reading from, or at the beginning of my, I do a lot of different things on my past life readings, but at the beginning of it, I do a lot of, I do Marielle's past life reading that Marie White put in her guidebook. So for example, that one has a center position of you, the person, right? So in that case, I could change that to being a place and then put a crossing card or another card of time, right? And then I can use this specifically to do with a place and specifically to do with a time, and then go into sort of greatest achievement. And then I would look here, not at drowning, because that's going to skew the message here. I'm not looking for that. I'm looking then for the actual cards and how would I read the, I think this is a Six of Swords. So I would have liked the titles to be a little larger, again, for people whose eyesight aren't the greatest. But I do like that it doesn't overwhelm the card either. So I would read about the Six of Swords as the greatest accomplishment, because this is that idea of being able to move away from a difficult situation. And then what was the greatest disappointment, right? And here we do have the Five of Swords, which is associated with violence and maybe being stuck in a situation of great violence. Something that was left unfinished. Here again, because I'm not looking for a time period here, I would go to the actual cards themselves, which I believe is the Four of Wands. So what was left unfinished was this idea of coming to a stability in the fire and the transformative air, making it to like the set goal. I think of the Four of Wands as sort of, you know, you're going along your path and you get to this place where you stop and achieve, have a sense of achievement, have a sense of acknowledgement of what you have achieved. There's still more to go, but at least stop and see what you've achieved, and that they never were able to make it there. And then the last one is a piece of advice for the actual the past life, the person in the past as they were in the past life, sitting across the table with the person who they are now, and if they could give them one piece of advice. And it is the Five of Cups, and this might be, depending again what I've seen already in the birth chart and things, this can be this idea of mourning what there is to be mourned, but then making sure that you're getting up and moving forward, and looking to what you do have with the Two of Cups, right? So that's just an example of how, well, that's how I start, and then I do other things, but that's how I start in a past life reading. And I think a deck like this is going to work amazingly in that way, because I can use the various aspects depending on what's there. Now, I usually do a card that's representative of the person, so I would probably do that first, and then maybe do a time and a place and a time, and then read those very specifically for a time and a place. And then, so that might be the way that I would modify this particular reading. And again, she does have an example, but it's the only reading in her book, so I'm not going to, map that out for somebody just to take as as a past life reading without purchasing the deck. Although I suppose I just did that with the Marielle, but I do this reading all of the time, and she did have other spreads as well. I do like to do examples of a person's spread in their reading, but this is the only spread that's in the book, so that just seems less of a sample and more of a just, there you go, here's her go-to past life reading. So I find this really interesting. I obviously am going to need to do some more readings with it. I've been very fascinated by the readings that I have gotten. Do I see this usable as just a standard tarot deck? I think if you're able to see past and understand what it is that you're looking for. So for example, you didn't have to use these keywords, then perhaps, but I think it's very specifically tailored to fit a need for the creator and for other people, such as myself, who do really enjoy working with past life readings. I think that it would be, for me personally, when I do past life readings, I am less interested in the details of the person's life, like specifically where were you, what country were you in, what time were you in. I love the idea of all of the people, the way that she has them. I'm less interested in directly into specifics when I do the readings, but I think that it would be another layer to be able to pull from intuitively if it came into light, right? If that had, so while I might say, okay, were you specifically from the Congo? Perhaps not, but I would look at between the Congo and the tarot card itself, and perhaps a little bit about the painting and the artist, and it might give some information regarding that life, even if it's not a specific place, because obviously there are many places in the world we can come from that can't be encompassed in just those amount of countries. I would be more interested in the continents, I think, than the specific places, but that could also reference back to the continent. So I think that I would probably be a little bit more general with the specific places, because of the fact that, there are two countries represented in the continent of Africa, and of course there are huge amount of countries, and certainly where in they are can be very different, whether it's in West Africa or South Africa or North Africa. You're going to have very different energies, right? But kind of zeroing it in on the continent of Africa can certainly at least lead in an interesting direction to give more insight. So I'm going to definitely be working with these, and I will check back with you. I've already done a couple readings for myself, and I found them to be very interesting. And I think that they would be great even for, you know, shorter past life readings, maybe not where you're going through your full birth chart and doing everything, but you're really working on perhaps how is a specific issue, how could that maybe relate to your past life, and just pulling 3 cards and seeing what is, you know, I would again probably have very specific positions here. So I might pull a card for, okay, what is the past situation that is influencing right now, right? And so then I would look at the conflict card for that. Okay, well, here's the card right now. I wouldn't, obviously, we're not looking for a place, so I would be looking at the 2 of Wands for the situation at hand. And then how could, you know, how can I learn from that and be able to move into a different direction in the future, and then maybe pull a card for that. And again, it would be about getting a new perspective that death can bring, a premature death can certainly bring. So I think my thing with this would be being very specific about what I was using them on, and not getting too overwhelmed by the titles unless it makes sense for the position that you're reading in. And I think that I think a lot of thought went into this, and I'm really excited to be doing some more work with it, and I will definitely check back with you about how it goes. I am going to pause this now and do a quick, I'm going to go ahead and edge it in black because it's just begging to be edged in black. It definitely has that darker feel, and then we have the black on the back. So I'm going to do that real quick just so that you can see that, and then I will talk to you all. I will put a link to the website. I don't know exactly, this was sent to me for the purpose of review, and so I will put a link to the person's website here, so that you can contact them about how, let's see what she says on the back. The Art History Tarot Deck for Past Lives is a select compilation of historical art designed to help you connect your soul to the past. Several tarot cards have been designated to geographical areas that share astrological zodiac signs with the corresponding tarot card. Select cards are assigned to certain historic periods as well. Each of the 78 images displays powerful emotional scenes rooted in place and time to guide the reader through the journey of past life exploration. The original tarot name of each card is indicated in the bottom right corner, allowing the deck to be used as a traditional tarot deck as well. Which again, you can certainly do if it doesn't bother you to have these titles up at the top, which doesn't bother me as long as you can see what it is. I think then you can use it for whatever you want to use it at. But I think it's probably going to shine as how it was very specifically constructed to be. So let me come back after edging this, and yeah, I just thought this was really interesting when I was she approached me, and we started talking about it because I do, as I said, do past life readings. And so it was really interesting when I started talking to her. You could just really tell that this was something that was a direct need for her. And so she really did the work to do the best that she could with the tools that she had, or the images and things like that, to be able to fill that need. And I think that that's something that it just interests me, because I think a lot of thought went into this, and I love that kind of thing. So I'll be back in a minute. Okay, I am back, and you can see that I have blackened the edges using a Sharpie Magnum, big fella here. And so I'm going to let that dry real good. I don't have any issue with Sharpie. Some people have an issue with Sharpie coming off in their hands. It definitely, by the time I'm done doing this, I have marks all over. It washes right off, as you can see. Once it's dry, I don't have any issue with Sharpie coming off in my hands whatsoever. I think this looks amazing on both sides. And yeah, I'm really thrilled with how that turned out. And so I'm just going to let this set up for a little bit. And again, this is definitely one that I will come back to after working with it for a while, and give you sort of an update on how it goes. But as I said, I've done a few readings with it, and I'm just really impressed with the layer of thought that went into this, that I think there's a lot to garner from her thought process, even outside of the whole concept of the deck as a past life deck. I really love the thought that went into correlating these types of things. So I'm excited about it. I think it's something neat. I think it's something unusual. I think it's something that fills a need. And so those are all amazing reasons to create something like this. So I hope this helps or interests you in some way. And I hope you have an absolutely wonderful rest of your day.